Welcome, everyone, back to another episode of 6 Degrees of Associations. I am joined today by Michelle Korsmo, the National Restaurant Association CEO. I thought I would turn the mic over, Michelle. Just introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about where you are today and your role.
So, Michelle Korsmo, I am the president and CEO of the National Restaurant Association. I'm also the CEO of the National Restaurant Association's Educational Foundation. I have been in this role since May of 2022, so coming up on a year, which is very exciting. It's my third trade association that I've had the privilege to lead. Before National Restaurant Association, I was the CEO of the Wine and Spirit Wholesalers of America, and before that, I was the CEO of the American Land Title Association. So very different trade associations all around.
And we were making the observation before we started recording here that, you hit ALTA and land title right during financial crisis, and then you went to wine and spirits and restaurant during the COVID period, which, again, lots of industries got whacked by that from a business perspective. But you hit three industries at three unique times, and you must have learned a ton from that.
Every time. My timing was impeccable. But there's no question. In fact, I started at ALTA in April of 2008, and of course the bottom fell out of the housing market the summer of 2008, so it was only a few months. But what a great experience to go through that work of really figuring out how to keep an organization going when you lose. We lost 60% of our revenue within a year. I wasn't the CEO at the time. The CEO was new at the beginning of 2008, and he brought me in to help him revitalize and energize the organization. And I thought, well, this will be fun. We've got all this great stuff we can do. We have a pretty healthy organization, good and healthy revenue stream. It should be really solid. But there's no doubt in my mind that the work that we did over the next, I was there in total for 10 years, and was the CEO for 7. Mm-hmm. The work that we did during that time period wouldn't have been possible if we wouldn't have gone through the real struggle and pressure of figuring out how to keep the organization afloat and what's the most important thing for us to do and to focus on. And then how do we deliver for our members during that housing crisis of 2008 and beyond?
Yeah, absolutely. That was a unique time.
That was a unique time. And it's interesting now because it's strange to think about how long ago it is. We haven't had a housing recession since then. And there's a lot of people in the business now that have never gone through a difficult time before. And so they're just now learning all of those lessons that you can almost only ever learn by experience.
Yeah, it's been a little bit of an easy ride since then, and lots of people are kind of going, ticking time bomb. Here it comes, right? Is it going to happen later this year? And not just that market, other markets, right? Lots of associations are having that conversation. Do we tighten the belt? Where do we invest? And this was during, again, a first year here at National Restaurant Associations. When you walked into that role, like you walked in almost before their show, and you're coming up on a year, what are the goals that you had going in, and what challenges did you see right out of the gate?
Well, one thing I think with all associations is that you have to experience a calendar year of an association in order to truly understand the organization. I mean, we know that there are so many things that we do on an annual basis that unless you go through a year, you don't really understand the organization yet. So I very much had the attitude coming in at the National Restaurant Association. We have an exceptionally strong team, an exceptionally strong trade association. They had done amazing work for the restaurant industry during the pandemic to advocate for their members whose businesses were shut down. Certainly we know many of those businesses didn't survive the pandemic, didn't get the funding resources that they needed in time to keep their businesses afloat. And that was certainly a really tough time. But the organization was really strong. So I'm coming into an organization that's strong. They've made it through the pandemic. We're entering this, thinking summer of last year, this really frustrating time frame from a supply chain perspective, being able to get both food and then also building supplies that are necessary for those restaurants that were growing and expanding and opening new locations. That is extremely difficult. Challenges with finding a workforce to come back into the restaurant industry, tremendously difficult and challenging and remains so today. And then, kind of how are we operating, right? So you're dealing with all of these changes, all of this new operation in a post-pandemic environment. What does that look like, right?
Yeah.
So that was really interesting. So my approach was very much to, as I talked with the team, to step onto the moving sidewalk that was already going along and not to be in a position where I throw the moving sidewalk up and everybody would be tossed over
Right.
and kind of wondering what's going on, because we were moving along in a forward direction. So what's happening? So I very much stepped onto the moving sidewalk with everyone on that team, going along, watching and seeing how we're operating, and then doing what I can to figure out how I want to focus my leadership for the association that I want to grow and lead during my time as a steward here.
Yeah, I think that's great. So what I heard is you jumped on with them. You did a lot of listening. You did a lot of observing. Walking in and having a fantastic team, like just such a sigh of relief. As having done that myself, like you don't want to walk in and be the one that's got to chop and cut and move and segment. So, and I'm sure you did your research on that role before stepping in to know that, hey, this is a great staff and probably a great board and an industry that could really use your help. And that's a lot of small businesses, which I know you kind of have a passion for helping a lot of small businesses and big and small. And so a year in, again, you're eyeing on your show coming up. How have your initiatives changed? And looking forward at the next year, how do you feel is the best use of Michelle's time?
So there's no question in my mind that as the CEO, my job is to really coalesce all of the thinking from our board leadership and also our team leadership in the organization of what's the most important things for us to be doing and focusing on. So I really take our strategic plan and the topics that we're working on, and then organize them in strategic pillars. So we have operational pillars that we focus on for an organization that really talks about how we're going to win, right? That's really our business strategy. This is what we're going to do. If we do these things, if we live up to these strategic pillars, we'll win as an organization. And then it's really thinking about those themes that are the most important topics for us to talk about. I first focused on the strategic pillars in the organization, rolled those out, talking about it with the board, talking a lot about it with the team, doing that work. But again, really internal operational items. And so when people say, what are you working on at the National Restaurant Association? I don't want to talk about internal things because that's kind of our internal work. That's our business plan. What I do want to talk about is what's on the mind of our members. And how we can be in that space and think about that. And that's where those strategic themes really come to play.
So I want to pull on both threads, right? We won't talk about just strategy, but I like strategy. And I've moved to twice a year strategic planning. So we have an annual strategic plan where we have everyone come together. Our teams are all remote, so they're all over the country. We have an outside facilitator that comes in, even for us who facilitates for others. But we have an outside consultant come in because we're a believer in that. And we set our own pillars. We call them strategic initiatives, no more than 3 to 5. And then from that, we hang quarterly rocks and weekly sprint items and sort of the OES model of business. But then we also check in mid-year. And I'm such a strong believer in that strategy and using that to keep you focused. I actually had a conversation with somebody. There's a third interview, and I get involved in like the third interview, right? So I let it go through its course, but I want to speak to them finally because we're a small business and everybody that comes in is going to impact the culture. And so I said, okay, let me just ask you an honest question. Why are you leaving your association? I won't name the name, but they're leaving their association. Why are you leaving it? And she said flat out, no hesitation, I'm leaving because the strategic plan hasn't changed in 7 years. We keep doing the same thing. We have the same pillars and we don't do anything about it. And we get together and we talk about it. And then we go do the other 7 or 8 hats that we all wear. And we get lost in that, and we never accomplish it.
Right. If a strategic plan is something that sits on, like you do the work, you create a really nice glossy book, it goes up on your shelf, and then when you look at, it's the 3rd year of a 4th year strategic plan, you pick it up, you blow the dust off of it, and you say, what are we supposed to do?
Right.
You've got a problem, right? That strategic work has to be much more of a living, breathing document that people are like in all the time. And it has to be something that everybody in the organization knows at the drop of a hat.
Yeah. I would say a little bit of, I hate to say silver lining of COVID was in my experience talking to association CEOs, the timeline with which they visit their strategic plan overall, generally speaking, I think is shortened, right? It used to be let's do a strategic plan every 5 years. Have you all done any changed anything in your mindset on how often you should do it?
I like annual. I like annual conversations with the board leadership about where do they think the industry is going. So I think you can do this well by asking a couple of really simple questions. I mean, even if you're not using outside facilitators,
Mm-hmm.
I think that if you can get together your leadership in a room and you have the conversation about where do we think the industry is going in the next 5 years, and I don't think it really makes sense to look beyond 5 years because anything beyond 5 years, you're just guessing, right? I mean,
Well, and we'll get a financial crisis or COVID or something anyway, so don't worry.
exactly. I mean, that's the thing. You're not going to say, oh, we're going to have another pandemic, right? You know, so, or you're going to we're going to have flying cars. That's just maybe too big. And as we know, those kind of changes are much more gradual. They're not
Right.
immediate, right? So
I take over everything, right?
yeah. You're going to see all of that stuff coming. You're going to see how AI really starts to implement before you get to a point of saying, okay, this is how it's going to change things. So if you think out 5 years from now, and AI, I think, is a great example of something to think about, you know, having the conversation about how is AI really going to change our industry? How would people be using it? What would that look like?
Mm-hmm.
And so if we think about how we think the industry is going to change over the next 5 years, and you truly have that conversation and do that work, and then afterwards you have the conversation once you've agreed to kind of those big themes. All right, if we believe this to be true, what should we as an organization be doing to help our members succeed in that environment? So if we do think, just to keep on the AI thread, if we do think that AI is going to have an influence on our business, what should we as an organization be doing? Well, very clearly on AI, you need to help people understand it, right? You've got to do a lot more education around it. You've got to do a lot more hands-on. You've got to get the vendors that are using it coming in and talking about why they see that as a solution and how they're using it. So all of that back and forth conversation over the next, you know, certainly if we're just looking a year out, but even in a year, you're going to gain a lot of information that will be helpful to your next conversation about how you think the world is changing.
Absolutely. I like that sort of cast the stone 5 years, look at the landscape then, and then work your way backwards. And I think you're right. I think AI is a great example because it will change, and the research and the content that you're pushing out, you can't push out now and expect it to be the same even in 6 months, right? Things are just going to continue to evolve, and absolutely. So switching gears then to the industry, what are some of those things that your industry is in need of that you're working on right now?
Well, it's interesting as you talk about digital and kind of what's out there in, you know, not so much the AI space, but just even in that digital space, you know, the restaurant industry has changed dramatically since the pandemic. If you think about how people are accessing restaurants first through web-based applications, right? They're looking at apps, they're looking at websites, they're going on third-party delivery services to decide what they're going to have that evening. And they're really looking at meal choices, right? So do I want a chicken sandwich? Do I want a hamburger? Do I want ribs? Do I want a salad? Like all of those things are driving their decisions about what they're going to have for dinner or a meal or a snack. And more often than at any other time in history, people are going to restaurants for their meal and food occasions. But what's fascinating about that is most of the time, that experience is off premise. So most of the time, people are going to restaurants either for pickup or for delivery to have that meal somewhere other than in that restaurant. So when you think about that change in consumer behavior, you can see where there's a lot that we can and should be doing for our members to talk about how that customer experience impacts their business and what can they be doing to help improve the customer experience to drive more business into their restaurant.
Yeah, curbside is cool now, right? I mean, every restaurant is advocated for more curbside spots, and it led not just during the pandemic. That's a new trend, right? Everybody,
Absolutely.
and then what else can we do? I went to an Airbnb. I was talking with Suzanne Bully, which you know from CSRA. And I was telling her I went to an Airbnb and I walked in and there was essentially a camera and an iPad set up, and there was a virtual person there, and they were in the Philippines, and they were the check-in, the concierge. And I thought, is this the future of restaurants? Am I going to walk into a restaurant or a host restaurant and I'm going to be talking to somebody maybe in a different state, maybe in a different country? I thought that was fascinating.
I mean, it's fascinating to think about the possibility, but this is what I would say. If you were to ask me, is that the future of restaurants? This is what I would say to you about that. The answer is it depends. It really depends on what type of restaurant it is. So I think that there are some restaurants where that may fit their brand, that may fit the type of hospitality that they're providing. But for every restaurant, they really need to think about what's that customer and guest experience. And is that virtual host something that fits our brand? And for most restaurants, I don't think that it is. Because when I think about the restaurant operators and the professionals that I know in the business, what they love about the business is that interaction with the customer, interaction with the guest, right? They love being able to provide that hospitality, and that's that personal touch. So I think those things that take the personal touch out are really only where it fits your brand. So we see that a lot more in some of the quick service restaurants. Yeah. And that makes sense because, again, it's quick service. The whole idea is how do we make this as fast as possible? And if you can automate that so that it's easier and faster for people to come in and order, then that's giving them a better customer experience. But if you're out to dinner with friends or out to dinner with your family and you want to have a, break from cooking and cleaning and all of those meals at home, you're probably going to want somebody to say, oh, it's the McCann family. Welcome. So glad to see you. Come on in. Well, your table is right this way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so my wife and I, we had our rehearsal dinner at the Monocle, right, on D Street in DC. And same owners. It's honestly, we've been married 16 years. It's the same maitre d', it's the same servers that have been there the entire time. And so we go back every year because of that. I mean, the food's good, but the service is great, right? They always remember us. Oh, hey, Mr. and Mrs. McCann, have a seat right here. And right, they bring you out, free dessert or whatever it is. And not going to sit doing that for.
And that's what's great about the Monocle. That's what everybody likes about the Monocle, is that it's always going to give you that consistency. I mean, one of the things that's great about the Monocle is it's old school.
Right.
And
right.
if the Monocle all of a sudden introduced robots to help deliver meals to tables, all of the guests and the customers at the Monocle would be like, what is going on?
Now I am here. Right.
Now I'm here. This does not fit. And it doesn't make any sense.
There are some innovations, but I like what you said. It's up to the brand. It's up to the style, if you will, of the restaurant. And of course, the owner operators, right? What's going to be what's fitting for them. But so speaking of innovation, right, there's this notion in the industry for associations. Some would disagree, but associations are always 10 years behind the mark when it comes to innovation and so forth. And I don't want to get into necessarily the reasons, red tape and all that. But if we could take some lessons from Fortune 500 companies that, are kind of on the literally, the cutting edge, what would those be that we should be looking at? What should we be learning? And what can we implement to some degree?
Right. So Jack Welch, I believe, is the gentleman who said, if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something we all need to be thinking about within our organizations. So what I would say on this is it's interesting because associations, often think, well, we should be further behind because we can't be ahead of our members. And I think that that's right. I mean, there's other phrases in the association business that, you should be one step ahead of your members, but not two. All of those things make sense. But remember, what's the job of the association? So the job of the association isn't to pick the business model winners or losers within an industry. The job of the association is to let your members see how the business environment is changing around them so that they can take that information and then go back and make the best decisions for their companies in order to compete in the marketplace. So the more that we as an association can help our members truly see how an industry is growing and changing and where it's going in the next 5 years, the more we can do that work, I think the better that we are serving our members in a way that's really meaningful. But that's the business of helping our members. When it comes to the business of running an association, that's a space where I think associations really have a job to step up and change the way they deliver that member value. You know, associations get a rap for being soft, for being easy places to be. And maybe, maybe some associations are, but it doesn't have to be that way. I think associations have as much and provided for their employees and leaders as much of an opportunity to be innovative and creative as any other type of career, profession, or entrepreneurial endeavor. So, if we can do our work to really think about what's that member value, how are we providing a strong member value for our members and our potential members in a way that really meets their needs, I think we can stay ahead of the curve. I think we can ensure that the rate of change on the inside exceeds the rate of change on the outside.
I think that's probably the best answer I've ever heard to that question. And I kept thinking, right, when you said the association shouldn't be behind the industry, much like a legislative representative shouldn't be in front of its constituents, right? But it doesn't mean that the legislator can't get on Twitter or can't stay current and be hip and be with it and understand the technology that might be being implemented. I think that's great.
Well, and where are your constituents? How are they communicating? How do they want to get information? Are you giving them information that they need? I think it's interesting when associations get frustrated because the members aren't, our members aren't reading our material, our members aren't accessing, the information that we have for them. Well, that's really something where we need to turn that back on us, because that means we're not delivering it in a way that's useful to our members where they can read it and digest it at a time when it's meaningful to them. I always say if we were a shoe company selling the latest and greatest tennis shoes and we send a bunch of passive emails out, so, we've designed a perfect tennis shoe for Lucas, right? It fits every part of your demographic profile with all of the data we have on you. This is exactly the shoe you want. And we sent you a bunch of emails and you don't open them and you don't read them. Are we going to say, oh, what's wrong with Lucas? I can't believe he didn't open those emails. How can he not see that we have this fabulous tennis shoe that would be exactly right for him?
Send you some direct mail. Just kidding.
Right. Send you some direct mail. But what we should be doing is testing. Maybe it is direct mail. Maybe it's videos. Maybe it's social media. Maybe it doesn't matter what it is. It's our job to continue to try to find the right place for you to see the information that we know is valuable to you.
Yeah, that's really important. I mean, sort of meeting them where they are and inserting yourself without inserting yourself in front of them.
Right.
So how do you do that, right? How does National Restaurant, for example, find the best way to meet people where they are?
Well, staying close with your members is one, but always testing, always trying new options, really looking at the data. One thing that I think is important is that you're always looking at the performance metrics of everything that you do that you care about. Like if you care about it, you should be measuring it. And if you're measuring it, you should be tracking, how are we doing and our numbers going up? Are we getting more open rates or fewer open rates? If we're getting fewer open rates, okay, something's wrong. Let's look at why there's fewer open rates. What should we do? Are people coming to and accessing our events? Are they coming to and accessing our webinars? Are they going on and seeing our research? Are they getting to it from this avenue or that avenue, right? It's constantly looking at the data and continually testing your delivery.
Continually, that's the key. Almost a common thread here. It's like, again, it doesn't just happen once and you go, oh, okay, we figured it all out. We know where Michelle is at what time and how she wants her shoe message delivered, because that may change.
I listened to this great podcast and I am embarrassed I can't think of which podcast it was. I listen to a lot of podcasts, so I can't remember this one in particular. And it was a football star that if I followed football, I'd probably know who he was, but I don't follow football, so I don't remember very well. But one of the listeners may know this. He told this great story about valuing growth over goals. And the story really centered around the quest to beat the 4-minute mile, right? So it was all about, can man actually run faster and beat the 4-minute mile? Not possible, not possible, not possible, until it was.
Right.
But the record that beat the 4-minute mile was 3 minutes and, what was it? 3 minutes and 59 seconds or 3 minutes and 57 seconds, which of course now has been beat decisively by another 15 or 20 seconds. So why is it that the first time it was about beating the 4-minute mile, it didn't come in 10 seconds under it or 15 seconds under it? Why was it just 1 second or 2 seconds under the 4-minute mile? Well, because the goal wasn't to get to 3:45. The goal was to beat 4 minutes. So if we're thinking about goals, sometimes we put arbitrary limits on what we can potentially do. And so the concept of thinking about growth over goals, I think, is a fascinating one.
I agree. I mean, stepping stones, waypoints, markers, lots of different ways to sort of get where you're going. But you have to build those in, don't you? I mean, just like the strategic plan, okay, we want to take our organization and we want to grow by 10% this year in our membership or our sponsorship or what have you. Okay, how are we going to do that? Because it's not going to happen in the first month. Probably going to happen if it does in December at the end if you're on a calendar year. And what are those steps?
What are the steps?
What are the steps to get us there? And then checking in continually to make sure that we're making that progress. I really like that.
Well, and thinking about too, so you can set a budget goal of a 10% increase in membership, which is a good thing to have because then you can base that on your plan. But throughout your year, let's say that you meet your 10% goal. If you're on a calendar year, let's say you meet your 10% goal in April. Then does the team say, oh, I'm done? Right. So there has to be something more than just setting that 10% goal. And I think this is really about how you're setting a culture of an organization of celebrating all of those milestones, right? So 10% goal, ring the bell, amazing. We hit our budget. Fantastic. We've got 5 more probably months that you're selling membership for that calendar year left in the cycle. What more can we do in these 5 months?
Yeah.
How much greater can we be?
And my favorite people during strategic planning when we do it are the people that are sitting there and we go, okay, here's our goal. And the people go, well, what if we do 10% more of that? Then what?
Right.
How are we going to celebrate that? What are we going to do? What are the incentives? Whatever it is, like, what if we do that? And then it immediately takes everybody's mindset out of that goal and goes, okay, well, how much further can we push it? And then what would it take to do that? Oh, well, it might take money or it might take time or whatever the investment in that is. But then you start to get people rallying behind, okay, well, let's go get that goal.
Right. And the important thing, too, is that you've built a team that thinks of themselves as goal breakers.
Yeah, absolutely. So is budget, you brought up budget. If you could break the budget, I teed you up for this question. So if you could break the budget, right? There's always items that are in the sideline, they get back burner. How I'd love to do that project, whether it's a passion project or it's a little bit risky, but I think it would be monumental for our industry or members or what have you. What would that be? And you said you have plenty of staff, which you do. But if you had more resources, what would you do with them?
So I think resources are always time, right? So time and attention are probably our most precious resources as an organization. Great. And if we were to do more, I think it's really having any organization thinking about, what's that amazing thing we could do or create. I learned about the concept recently of skunkworks teams, which was something that Boeing created in order to really do some redesign work. on one of their planes, knowing that they couldn't do it with the existing team that was building a plane because you're too busy building a plane, keeping an organization going, keeping the association going, sending out the membership dues, doing the membership contacts, making sure people are engaged.
The important stuff, right?
Creating the meeting, doing the advocacy, all of those things that we have to do. So could you create a team that you set aside to really think about that audacious goal of what you could do and create for an organization that would help transform an industry so that they could be more competitive? And I think that's really the space that everybody can think about. When you had teed me up on this, you said, what if you had more staff or more money? And I said, I think it's okay for people not to think about more staff, because I've had the real privilege and joy of working with small teams and now working with a really large association team.
Mm-hmm.
And what I would say is each of those teams has the ability and has done truly amazing things for their members, outsized for the size of the organization they are. So it's really more of a mindset situation than it is a team situation. And I'm sure people listening are thinking, oh, easy for you to say, right? Now you've got a big team. But this goes back to the real key of setting the priorities. So if you've got a small team, you really work on, okay, there's only so many of us, there's only so much money, there's only so much time in the day. What should we be doing? What's the most important thing for us to do to deliver for our members, right? Kind of going back to those strategic questions of, what can we do to help our members succeed as the world is changing? And I think that work in and of itself is the thing that can get the team really focused on delivering big things. And so, as you get to a bigger organization and there's more structure that needs to be delivered on for your members, you still have that same issue and concern about, okay, how do we get a team to really focus on something that we could do that's transformative?
Yeah. We mentioned also, even the largest associations are still small businesses.
Yeah.
Right? And that is something I think that almost all small businesses struggle, regardless of the industry, is you're the owner operator, you have a staff to manage, you have all these things that you're working constantly in the business. And where do you find the time, and how do you carve out the time to just sort of set aside and work on the business and dream, right? And think big. And that is often the time. I mean, I've been guilty of that too. I'm going, doing all these things that I had to get done and working with the team. And, oh, wait, what are we doing next year?
Right. Well, this is where, you have to have purposeful meetings. You have to have purposeful time that you set aside to think about those other things. If you keep your head down and just try to keep the process going, and you don't take that time to lift your head up and see how things are changing, Who Moved the Cheese is a classic for a reason.
Right.
You really do need to lift your head up every once in a while and see how things are changing. And I think it is about having that discipline to do that. On another side of that same coin, I was having a conversation with one of my coworkers who is traveling for work. It's her kid's spring break. She goes back this evening, and her kids have kind of not done a whole lot this spring break. And so she was saying, I feel bad about all of it. And she said, I've got all this stuff to do on Friday. And I said, absolutely not. Most important thing for you to do is to go and do something with your kids for spring break, take a long weekend and make something happen. Because a month from now, you are not going to remember what you did on that Friday in work. You're just absolutely not going to remember what those specific things were. The most important thing for you to do is carve that chunk of time out to do what is the most important thing.
Yeah, it's sometimes easier to tell others to do that than to tell ourselves to do
Absolutely.
that.
It's good to do that for your coworkers. You can
feels
do that.
Good, and I would rather do that than do it for myself. And so I need somebody else sometimes to tell me, you need to put the phone down, you need to disconnect, you need to take the time and not do this.
That's right.
Absolutely. Great advice on you're not going to remember what you did at work. I agree. But you will remember that experience with your kids and your family. one more question. I like this question. It's a little bit of a look back to current. It could be anywhere in between. I'm curious, when you look at your career to date, you have much more career ahead of you. What are you most proud of? What is that work that sort of stands out to you that I am really proud of that work that I did within the industry?
There's a lot of accomplishment. And when I look back at the work that I've done with the organization, there's really a lot that I see that we accomplished that I'm really proud of. It makes me proud to see it, especially in the organizations that I'm no longer leading, to see those things continue. I love seeing that. I love seeing the work, the projects, the programs, the engagement, all continuing, the joy that the members feel with the organization. That, and I get a lot of that from social media, and so we all get the highlight reel. To see that highlight reel is really wonderful. But I'm not going to talk about specifics for any one of those things, because I think the thing that I find most satisfying is the number of people that I worked with, that I talked to, that talk about the great things that we did together, that talk about the opportunities that they have, talk about, not giving up the chance, the ability to create things bigger than we thought we could, to do more than we thought we could. I think that work that we did together as a team in each of the organizations that I've been a part of is the thing I'm most proud of.
I've heard that about you. It was one of the things that was excited me about this interview. We essentially just met. That's not a surprise or secret necessarily, but I've heard from others that worked with you at ALTA and people on my team who had said, you're really going to enjoy this. Michelle's great to talk to. She's really been sort of climbing the ladder in the association industry, and you only do that if you're doing great work and if you're a good human and a good individual with good values. So again, thank you so much for the time, Michelle. You got thousands of members, and for take out the time to have this conversation. I really appreciate it. So thank you. I enjoyed it. And
well, it was all worth it to hear you say that people were saying good things about the time that we had spent together, because all of those people that I've had a chance to work with are really special. So I'm thrilled to hear they think the same. But nice to be with you, Lucas. Absolutely.
My pleasure. And so as we do at the end of our episodes, is we like to ask our guests, is there somebody else that you think our audience would find value in hearing from and having a conversation with?
Yes, I do. The gentleman that came first to mind for me is someone that I have worked with, or at least worked with his business, in all three of the trade associations I've been a part of, and that's Don Neal. Don is the founder of 360 Live Media. He is our association madman, I think, if we were to describe him well, and always just a great font of information, and somebody that really made me feel uncomfortable in several situations, challenged my thinking, challenged me in my comfort zone of saying, are you really doing as well as you think you are as an organization? Was that really an okay meeting and event? What did that data really tell you? And I think that ability to really challenge my thinking, our team's thinking, allowed us to do so much more and create so much more. And I know he'd be a really fun guest for you.
I like him already. I mean, on the other side of that uncomfortable, as you know, is where the growth lives, right? Yeah. And when you're challenged, you think differently, you do things differently. And so I'm excited, and thank you for that recommendation. And thank you again, Michelle, for the time.
My pleasure.